Let's just take a deep breath together, knowing we already are that place that serves as sanctuary for one another. We are the place that love shows up, that God shows up, that joy shows up, so that in our connection with one another, we find refuge and sanctuary together. I want to share with you from Barbara Holmes in her book, Joy Unspeakable, a little bit of a poem she wrote and why joy is so important right now on the planet. She says, "Joy unspeakable erupts when you least expect it. When the burden is greatest, when the hope is gone, after bullets fly, it rises. On the crest of impossibility, it sways to the rhythm of steadfast hearts and celebrates what we cannot see." She goes on to say that this joy beckons us not as individual monastics, but as a community. It is a joy that lives comfortably in the shout as it does in the silence. It is expressed in the diversity of personal, spiritual disciplines and liturgical rituals. This joy is our strength. And we need strength because we are well into the 21st century and we are not healed. How shall we negotiate postmodernity without inner strength? How shall we address nihilism, debilitating health issues, and political regressions that threaten the community? Since the intensity of these afflictions has not been assuaged by our high-tech diversions or church as usual, I am suggesting a turn inward, that we face the inner conflicts and seeping psychic wounds that can no longer be ignored. I am also suggesting a turn toward the community, toward openness, intersectionality, intercultural cooperation, and solidarity. These public and private turns will improve our chances of bringing the beloved community into being. We are in need of all of our spiritual resources, and as Bell Hooks suggests, we must seek an emancipatory and liberatory spirituality, the soul's guiding light in the midst of collective blindness. The light has never left us. We need only make the contemplative turn to restore the inner light. Amen. This is why joy, right? Not joy for spiritual bypassing, not joy for going la 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 la, I don't want to see it, I don't want to deal with it. I would rather just like numb out and disconnect and shut down, isolate, retreat. But the kind of joy that brings us together in song, the kind of joy that allows us to come into contact with the divine by remembering that our aliveness is worthy of celebration and is not dependent upon external circumstances. That the joy gets to be here anyways, right? Barbara Holmes wrote that book about the Black contemplative experience, right? How it is we can dance and sing and shout and pray and know God in the midst of horror. And that this skill, this practice, is revolutionary because it pulls our attention back from other powers, untrue powers, into the truth of who we are, into the one power, into the one life, into God itself that is living itself through your aliveness. And it is joy that helps us have a felt experience of our aliveness. As I was waking this morning and working through prayer to not deep dive into despair, I found myself thinking, okay, I can't think my way out of this. Words are not going to do it. So off to the garden I went. And in the garden, we're doing nothing in particular. I planted a few straggly cherry tomatoes. I pulled some weeds. I did some mulching, right? Had some snacks, because snacks. But a couple hours later, I found myself full to overflow with gratitude. The simple practice of just engaging with my own aliveness in the garden, no words needed, did that thing that she said, joy unspeakable, rises unexpectedly in the impossible. And it's not that we can force ourselves to find joy, right? We can maybe do laughter yoga and get ourselves to sip it. We can sing some stuff, we can dance it out, and sometimes we touch it because we do those things. But joy is ever available, but also not the way we can't get to it all the time in the ways that we think we can. But we have practices in place, like the garden, like discussion groups, like prayer, like sound bath, like yoga, like all the practices that you may engage in your life, so that we can be present to it when it rises. So we notice it when it suddenly shows up unexpectedly, so we can be there for it. You know, that's how God works sometimes. It rises unexpectedly in our experience, and if we're paying attention, we get to come into contact with it. We get to have the feeling in our bodies of gratitude so strong, like, holy crap, I love my life. 2 hours before I was like, this is all sucking, I need a vacation. Right? But it's the practice that doesn't necessarily make God show up, doesn't make joy show up, but it allows us to be able to be there and be prepared for when it does. It helps us be in the practice of readying ourselves for the experience of the divine, for the experience of joy. And I think because we're raised in this sort of extractive capitalist culture, we want to do spiritual practices that mean we're going to get something for it, right? I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do my thing, I'm going to sit on my cushion for 27 and a half minutes, I'm going to say my prayers, and I'm going to do the thing, and then I should get joy for that. I should get some peace for doing that, dang it. It doesn't work like that. The good news, though, is because we practice, we come into contact more easily, more often with the divine that is available in all of these experiences. I kind of feel like joy is ice cream, and it comes in all of these flavors. Right? It comes in the flavors of delight and enthusiasm and ecstasy and pleasure and play. And so there's lots of ways to experience joy. And we get to find the pleasurable ways that we get to have it. Yes, Maeve, you're closer than we are, most of us, more often. We get to find the ways that help us come into contact more readily, more easily. And it's important that we have practice around it and understand that our joy is this thing that brings us into contact with the divine that is sometimes called eros, right? Which is sometimes celebrated through the goddess Freya, through Oshun. There's tons of ways in spiritual traditions across the globe that try to talk to us, teach us about coming into contact with the divine that feels good. This is not just about, transcending and reaching the no thing, which we also get really into, right? Like, I'm about to transcend all this isness. Let me just meditate right on out of here, right? We look for that too in our spiritual life. But there's this other thing, this embodied experience of the divine called joy that we can cultivate. And I think is one of the greatest resources we have right now to rebel and revolt against culture. When you and I come into contact with actual joy, that thing that just fills me up and that says, oh my God, I am so alive and I am so grateful and I am so into my aliveness and my connection to this life, to you, to understanding our inherent connection that cannot be broken. I'm so into it that now I know what I am a stand for. Now I know what I am unwilling to give away. Now I know which power is the power that cannot be dismantled, harmed, broken, diminished, oppressed. Cannot be. And this is the power we need in revolution. This is the thing that we understand. Oh my God. I know God as my very breath. I know that I am connected to you in this thing that is way bigger than anybody else's sense of dominion. And because I know that I am willing to protect it. I know that everything I do can be in honor of it to grow and expand that experience for myself and everybody I know. This is true power. You and I connected to our divinity and how good it is. If you caught my sermon that came out this morning introducing this series, I was talking about the erotic, the eros, using Audre Lorde's incredible teaching about when we begin to taste that and feel the divine through our own pleasure, through our own bodies, we become unstoppable. We become unoppressible. And we become responsible to a life that will settle for nothing less. That's how powerful your joy is. That's how powerful God is living itself through your aliveness. So we cannot drink the Kool-Aid or buy the story that isolation and separation and shutting down and retreating and moving away and trying to hide from this outer circumstance. When we do that, we cut ourselves off from one another and from our own divinity. It is divinity, it is the power of the Holy Blessed One that is breathing you right now. And is through the practices that bring you into contact with joy, through the pleasurable practices, through playful practices, that remind you, not in thought, but in feeling, of what it means to be divinely made, appointed and anointed in this life on purpose. I'm going to share a poem, one of my all-time favorite poems, from one of my all-time favorite poets, Hafiz, who I consider to be my boyfriend on another plane. This is a translation by Daniel Ladinsky called Don't Die Again. Hafiz says, I am a man who knows the 10,000 positions of divine love. I can tell the light in your eyes that you are still most familiar with the few earthly ones. But what would not a good father instruct all his heirs toward the path that will someday deeply satisfy? This world is a treacherous place and will surely slay the down and the lazy. The only life raft here is love and the name. Say it, family. Say the divine name, dear kin, silently as you walk. Don't die again with that holy ruby mine inside still unclaimed, when you could be swinging a golden pick with each step. Don't die again with a holy ruby mine inside that hasn't been unearthed yet. Each single one of us has this ruby mine inside, but it is through the action, like the walking, it is through the steps we take that we can unearth it and bring it alive. That is why you are here. That is what your community needs from you, is you fully alive as the truth of who you are with the gifts that you've been designed to give. That has always been the plan. Don't let any ish out here tell you otherwise. I think God knows better. So the practice is finding the things, the play and the pleasure the spiritual practices that bring you alive to the ruby mind inside you.